10 vehicles, factory modifications, and frontline improvisations. Some were transformed in assembly plants, others adapted by desperate soldiers under fire. These machines proved that the best weapon wasn't always the one that left the factory, but the one that evolved to meet battlefield reality. This is 10 vehicles that changed World War II through modification. Subscribe to see more modified war machines. M3 Half-Track, the platform of infinite possibilities. Originally designed as a simple armored personnel carrier to transport infantry squads into battle, the M3 became the most modified vehicle of World War II. A blank canvas that soldiers transformed based on desperate battlefield needs. Field workshops welded additional armor plates to the front and sides, converting thin-skinned transports into assault vehicles capable of leading attacks. Crews mounted everything from extra .30 and .50 caliber machine guns to capture German MG-42s, creating mobile fire support platforms that could suppress enemy positions. The most dramatic modifications came in the Pacific Theater, where Marines added M2 flamethrowers that could project burning napalm 150 feet, naval rocket launchers scavenged from damaged ships, and even 37mm anti-tank guns mounted in makeshift turrets. In Europe, some variants bristled with so many weapons they resembled mobile fortresses, mounting quad .50 caliber machine guns, 81mm mortars, and additional armor that brought total weight to nearly double the original design. Other units stripped everything for speed, creating fast reconnaissance vehicles that could outrun German armor. The M3's simple, robust mechanical design meant soldiers could modify it with basic arc welders and hand tools available in any field workshop. And every theater developed unique configurations based on local combat needs and available materials. By war's end, over 41,000 M3s had been produced, and nearly every one had been modified in some way, from simple armor additions to complete reconstruction that made them unrecognizable from factory standard. The vehicle proved that adaptability was more valuable than specialized perfection. Sherman Firefly, the British solution to German superiority. When British tank crews faced Tigers and Panthers in Normandy during summer 1944, their standard 75mm guns bounced harmlessly off German armor, turning engagements into one-sided massacres that demoralized Allied armored units. Desperate for a solution that couldn't wait for new tank designs, British engineers performed what American designers had declared impossible. They crammed the massive 17-pounder anti-tank gun into the standard M4 Sherman turret through radical modification. The conversion required removing the whole machine gunner's position entirely, relocating the radio equipment to an armored box welded onto the rear of the turret to balance the gun's weight, completely redesigning the internal turret layout to accommodate the gun's enormous breech mechanism, and reinforcing the turret ring to handle recoil forces that could crack weaker structures. The gun's recoil was so violent that crews had to brace against the turret walls before firing, and the muzzle blast was powerful enough to knock infantry off their feet at 50 meters and blind the gunner with dust if fired in dry conditions. Despite these brutal characteristics, the Firefly could penetrate a Tiger I's frontal armor at 1,000 meters and destroy a Panther at 1,500 meters, ranges where German tanks still felt safe from Allied guns. This modification made the Firefly the most feared Allied tank from the German perspective, and enemy tank commanders issued standing orders to identify and destroy Fireflies first in any engagement. Recognizing that this British modification had eliminated Germany's qualitative armor advantage, Firefly crews responded with their own modifications. They painted false unit markings to blend in with standard Sherman platoons, removed or disguised the distinctive muzzle brake that identified the 17-pounder, and some even welded dummy hole machine guns to make their tanks look standard from a distance. This deadly game of disguise and identification meant that revealing a Firefly's true nature guaranteed concentrated fire from every German gun in range. But when positioned correctly, a single Firefly could dominate an entire battlefield, destroying German armor that would have massacred conventional Sherman platoons. While American mechanical simplicity and British desperation drove these modifications, German engineering faced different pressures as the tide of war turned against them. M16 multiple gun motor carriage, the factory's answer to desperation. When the Luftwaffe dominated European skies in 1940, and American planners feared German air superiority over any future invasion, engineers took the proven M3 half-track chassis and mounted a Maxon M 45 quad mount housing 4.50 caliber Browning machine guns in a powered turret. This factory modification created a mobile anti-aircraft platform that could put 2,400 rounds per minute into the sky, creating a wall of lead that forced German pilots to altitudes where accurate bombing became impossible. The electrically powered turret could traverse 360 degrees and elevate to 90 degrees, tracking fast-moving aircraft with deadly precision. However, the most significant modification came not from the factory, but from soldiers who discovered the M16's devastating effectiveness against ground targets. In the Battle of the Bulge, M16 crews turned their anti-aircraft guns horizontally and chewed through German infantry formations, advancing in dense winter fog, the Quad 50s firing tracers that ignited fuel dumps and ammunition stores. In the Pacific, they cleared Japanese defensive positions that had stopped conventional attacks, the sustained fire literally sawing through palm trees and bunkers. The life-saving modification came when crews welded armor shields around the gun mount, protecting operators from return fire and shrapnel that had made the original open design a death trap for gunners exposed above the half-track's protection. M8 Greyhound, the armored car that refused to die. Designed in 1942 as a fast reconnaissance vehicle with light armor and a 37mm gun intended only for self-defense against infantry and light vehicles, the M8 seemed hopelessly obsolete by 1944, when German armor had evolved into 70-ton monsters with guns that could destroy it from over a mile away. Yet, field modifications and tactical adaptation kept the Greyhound not just relevant, but essential through creative battlefield evolution. Crews added sandbags and spare track links welded to the hull for extra armor protection against Panzerfaust rockets and shell fragments, mounted additional .30 and .50 caliber machine guns for close-range defense against infantry ambushes, and some units experimented with mounting captured German MG 42s for superior firepower. The most significant modification was tactical rather than mechanical. Reconnaissance units learned to exploit the M8's 55-mile-per-hour top speed and six-wheel drive for rapid flanking maneuvers, spotting for artillery rather than engaging directly, and escaping before German tanks could bring their superior guns to bear. In one legendary incident during the Battle of the Bulge, an M8 Greyhound crew from the 87th Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron knocked out a German King Tiger tank by maneuvering behind it through narrow village streets and pumping 337mm rounds into the rear engine compartment, proving that speed and positioning could overcome enormous firepower disadvantages. Late war factory modifications added improved communications equipment for better artillery coordination and smoke grenade launchers for rapid escape, transforming the Light Scout into a sophisticated reconnaissance platform. M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman, the assault tank born from necessity. After brutal hedgerow fighting in Normandy revealed that standard Shermans couldn't survive direct assaults on fortified German positions without catastrophic losses, American factories performed a radical modification in spring 1944 that transformed reliable Shermans into heavily armored breakthrough tanks. Engineers welded massive steel plates onto the hull, increasing frontal armor from 51mm to 102mm, and designed an entirely new cast turret with 152mm of frontal protection, thicker armor than the feared Tiger bars. The modification added over 10 tons to the Sherman's weight, reducing top speed from 30 to 22 miles per hour. But the enhanced protection meant jumbos could absorb direct hits from German 75mm and 88mm guns at combat ranges that obliterated standard Shermans. The most significant field modification came when crews began swapping the original 75mm gun for the high-velocity 76mm gun, creating tanks that combined heavy armor with serious anti-tank capability. Jumbo crews reported that German tank commanders often retreated when encountering these modified Shermans, mistaking them for new American heavy tanks and refusing to engage. Only 254 jumbos were produced, making them rare enough that division commanders hoarded them for the most desperate breakthrough operations. But their psychological impact exceeded their numbers, as German intelligence wrongly believed America was fielding thousands of new heavy tanks. But while American modifications focused on increasing firepower and protection, German engineers faced a different problem: creating effective weapons from a collapsing industrial base. Sturmgeschütz III, the assault gun that became a tank destroyer. Originally designed in the late 1930s as a mobile artillery piece to provide direct fire support for infantry assaulting fortified positions, the Stug III underwent one of the war's most dramatic functional transformations, driven by desperate battlefield necessity. Early variants mounted a short-barreled 75mm gun, optimized for firing high-explosive shells against bunkers and machine gun nests, with a low-profile casemate design that made it nearly invisible in defensive positions. The modification that changed everything came in 1942, when German forces on the Eastern Front faced overwhelming numbers of Soviet T-34s and KV-1s that their existing anti-tank guns couldn't stop. Engineers modified the Stug III by installing the long-barreled 75mm Stu K-40 gun, transforming the infantry support vehicle into a lethal tank destroyer capable of penetrating Soviet armor at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. This single modification was so successful that the Stu G3 became the most produced German armored vehicle of the war, with over 10,500 built, and accounted for more Allied tank kills than any other German vehicle through a combination of its devastating gun, low profile that made it nearly impossible to spot in ambush positions, and the fact that Germany could produce 3 Stu G3s for the cost of 1 Panther tank. Field modifications added to its lethality. Crews welded additional armor plates to vulnerable areas, added remote-controlled machine guns on the roof to defend against infantry without exposing the crew, and mounted extra track links and spare road wheels as improvised armor against shaped charge weapons. Late war variants received factory modifications, including shirts and side skirts to defeat anti-tank rifles and hollow charge rounds, Zimmerit anti-magnetic paste to prevent magnetic mines from sticking to the hull, and improved commander's cupolas for better visibility. The Stu G3's evolution from artillery support to tank destroyer demonstrated that battlefield necessity could completely redefine a vehicle's role, and its success came not from sophisticated engineering, but from a simple, reliable design that could be continuously modified to meet changing combat requirements. Panzer IV/70, the desperate hybrid of necessity. As Allied bombing devastated German tank production facilities in 1944, and Panther tank production couldn't meet frontline demands, German engineers created one of the war's most unusual modifications by mounting the Panther's powerful 75mm POC. 42 gun in a fixed casemate on the more readily available Panzer IV chassis. This factory modification promised to deliver Panther-level firepower at lower cost and faster production rates, creating a vehicle that could destroy any Allied tank at extreme range while using the proven, reliable Panzer IV mechanical components that German field workshops knew how to maintain. The theoretical advantages were impressive. The low-profile casemate made it harder to spot than turreted tanks. The powerful gun could penetrate 140 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters, and production facilities already tooled for Panzer IV chassis could be quickly converted. However, the modification created serious problems that field crews struggled to solve. The heavy gun and thick frontal armor made the vehicle extremely nose-heavy, straining the Panzer IV's suspension beyond its design limits and causing frequent mechanical failures. The weight distribution was so poor that crews nicknamed it Guderian's duck because it wobbled like a duck when moving over rough terrain, and the front-heavy design made it prone to throwing tracks on turns or slopes. Field modifications attempted to compensate. Crews added counterweights to the rear, reinforced suspension components with parts cannibalized from destroyed vehicles, and some units experimented with wider tracks to better distribute ground pressure. The cramped fighting compartment, inherited from mounting a large gun in a small chassis, made crew efficiency suffer as the loader struggled to handle heavy ammunition in confined space, and the limited gun traverse of only 20 degrees left the vehicle vulnerable to flanking attacks. Despite these flaws, the Panzer IV/70 destroyed hundreds of Allied tanks through sheer firepower and the desperation of German crews who had no better options, proving that even flawed modifications could be effective when nothing else was available. Yet Germany's most dramatic modifications came not from combat vehicles, but from the simple utility vehicles that kept armies moving when fuel and resources vanished. Tiger II, the Super Heavy modified into existence. When German intelligence reports revealed that Soviet heavy tanks and Allied tank destroyers were finally penetrating Tiger, one armor in 1943, Henschel engineers didn't design a completely new vehicle, but instead modified the Tiger concept into something far more formidable and ultimately impractical. The King Tiger combined the WWII's chassis philosophy with the Panther's sloped armor design, mounting a massive 88mm KWK-43L71 gun in a hull protected by up to 180mm of frontal armor, angled at 50 degrees, creating a mobile fortress that was virtually immune to frontal attack from any Allied weapon. Early production models received Porsche-designed turrets with a curved front that looked impressive, but created a shot trap, where incoming rounds could ricochet down into the thin roof armor, a fatal flaw that combat experience revealed within weeks of deployment. The factory modification to Henschel's flat-faced turret eliminated this vulnerability, but the 70-ton weight created problems no modification could solve. The tank destroyed bridges rated for lighter vehicles, consumed fuel so rapidly that it often ran dry before reaching combat, and strained its engine and transmission beyond their design limits. Field crews attempted desperate modifications to keep King Tigers operational, cannibalizing parts from disabled tanks, adding auxiliary fuel tanks that made the vehicle even heavier, and in some cases removing turrets from immobilized hulls to create static pillboxes when mechanical failures left them unable to move. Despite these problems, a properly positioned King Tiger with adequate fuel and ammunition could dominate an entire battlefield, and its psychological impact on Allied tank crews was immense. But the modifications that made it so powerful also ensured that mechanical failures and fuel shortages immobilized more King Tigers than enemy fire ever destroyed. Volkswagen Kübelwagen, the people's car modified for war. Ferdinand Porsche's economical civilian vehicle design underwent surprisingly minimal factory modifications to create Germany's primary light utility vehicle, proving that sometimes simplicity required less change than sophistication. The military version added revised gear ratios for off-road performance, a lockable differential for improved traction in mud and snow, modified suspension to handle rough terrain, and mounting points for machine guns and radio equipment. The air-cooled engine, originally designed for civilian economy, became a military asset because it couldn't freeze in Russian winter or boil over in African heat like water-cooled engines. Field modifications transformed Kübelwagens based on local needs. Crews in North Africa added extra water storage and sand tires. Russian front units welded improvised armor plates around the driver. Some vehicles received heavier weapons, including MG-42 machine guns, or even 20mm anti-aircraft guns, and reconnaissance units stripped unnecessary weight for maximum speed. The Kübelwagen's lightweight and simple mechanics meant it could traverse terrain that stopped heavier vehicles, and mechanics could repair it with basic tools available in any village workshop. Over 50,000 were produced, and their reliability in extreme conditions made them more valuable than sophisticated vehicles that constantly broke down. Kettenkrad, the motorcycle tractor hybrid nobody asked for. NSU's bizarre combination of a motorcycle front end with tracked rear wheels seemed like a solution, searching for a problem when introduced in 1940. But desperate modifications and creative field use transformed it into an invaluable utility vehicle. Originally designed for airborne troops who needed something air-transportable that could tow light artillery, the Kettenkrad could traverse terrain impossible for wheeled or fully tracked vehicles. Deep mud, snow, sand, and rough ground that would bog down motorcycles while being lighter and more fuel efficient than full tanks. Factory modifications added a cargo bed behind the driver, towing hitches for various artillery pieces, and waterproofing for river crossings. Field crews modified them extensively, adding armor plates for reconnaissance missions, mounting machine guns for self-defense, fitting different track designs for specific terrain from Russian snow to African sand, and even creating improvised ambulances in desperate situations. The Kettenkrade's unique capability to tow loads through conditions that stopped everything else made it essential for artillery units, and its ability to lay communication wire while traversing terrain where soldiers couldn't walk made it invaluable for signal corps. Only 8,500 were produced, but their unique modifications filled roles no other vehicle could handle.